In the heart of Los Angeles, where dreams are manufactured daily and sold to the highest bidder, sometimes the most authentic moments happen when the cameras aren't rolling. This is a story about one of those moments, a quiet intersection of lives that would have gone unnoticed if not for the ripples it created afterward. The day began like any other at Rodriguez Auto Repair. The morning sun beat down on the corrugated metal roof, making the interior of the garage shimmer with heat despite the industrial fans working overtime. The smell of motor oil, rubber, and that distinctive scent of cars that have seen better days filled the air. This wasn't one of those glossy corporate auto shops with matching uniforms and computerized diagnostics for every minor issue. This was a place where cars were still fixed with calloused hands and hard-earned knowledge. Kyle Murphy had been working at the garage for nearly 15 years. He started as an apprentice under Antonio Hill, the original owner, learning everything from basic oil changes to rebuilding engines from scratch. When Antonio passed away 3 years ago, his daughter, Alejandra Santiago, took over the business. She didn't know much about cars, but understood numbers well enough to see that the garage was barely staying afloat in an era of dealership service centers and quick lube chains. But Kyle stayed on. Not because the pay was good, it definitely wasn't, but because he believed in the work they did. They fixed cars for people who couldn't afford to buy new ones, who depended on their vehicles to get to jobs that barely paid enough to support their families. In a city built around driving, Rodriguez Auto Repair was sometimes the only thing standing between someone and unemployment. That particular Wednesday had been especially grueling. A city bus had broken down near their shop, and the driver, recognizing Kyle from the neighborhood, had practically begged him to take a look. The garage didn't typically service vehicles that large, but Kyle couldn't say no. It had taken him hours working through lunch to identify and fix the issue. By late afternoon, when the bus finally pulled away with a grateful honk, Kyle was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that makes your movement slow and your thoughts foggy. He'd been pulling double shifts all week because Brandy Morgan, their other full-time mechanic, was home with a sick child. And the night before, Kyle's apartment building had lost power, leaving him tossing and turning in the summer heat until well past midnight. "You look like hell warmed over," Alejandra said, leaning against the doorframe of the small office, a clipboard in her hand. "Why don't you take off early? We're pretty much done for the day anyway." Kyle wiped his hands on a rag that had long ago lost its original color. "Can't. Brett's Camaro is coming in at 5. Timing belt issue." "I forgot about that one." Alejandra frowned, checking her watch. "That's still an hour away. At least take a break. You've been going non-stop since 7 this morning." Kyle nodded, too tired to argue. He made his way outside to his car, a 1998 Honda Civic that had seen better days but ran perfectly because, well, he was a mechanic after all. The interior of the car was even hotter than the garage, and Kyle cranked the windows down before settling into the driver's seat. He just needed to close his eyes for 20 minutes, just enough time to recharge before Brett Perry showed up with his temperamental Camaro. He didn't intend to fall into a deep sleep, but his body had other plans. Meanwhile, 10 miles away, Paul Walker was stuck in traffic on Santa Monica Boulevard. Unlike the carefully choreographed scenes in the Fast and Furious franchise that had made him famous, there was nothing exciting about inching forward in Los Angeles traffic on a sweltering summer day. His air conditioning was blasting, but he could still feel sweat beginning to form along his hairline. Paul was on his way to look at a potential car for his collection. He'd always been passionate about automobiles, long before he became the face of one of Hollywood's biggest action franchises. It wasn't just about the speed or the status. He genuinely appreciated the engineering, the history, the artistry that went into creating these machines. The car he was going to see today was a rare 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS. The owner had reached out through a mutual friend, knowing Paul's reputation as a serious collector. The address he'd been given was in a predominantly industrial area, not unusual for someone keeping a valuable vintage car in a specialized garage. As the traffic finally began to clear, Paul's phone rang through his car's speakers. "Hey, it's Caleb," the voice said. Caleb Ritter was a longtime friend who shared Paul's passion for cars. "Just checking if you're still heading to see that Porsche." "On my way now," Paul replied, accelerating as the road finally opened up. "Should be there in about 15 minutes. If this traffic holds." "Listen, I did some digging on that car," Caleb said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "The VIN checks out, but something feels off about the seller. I couldn't find much information on him or the garage where he's keeping it." Paul frowned. The vintage car world had its share of scammers and counterfeits, especially when it came to rare models that could command prices in the high 6 or even 7 figures. "Thanks for the heads up," he said. "I'll keep my eyes open. You know I'm not making any decisions today anyway. Just want to see if it's the real deal." "Just be careful, man," Caleb said before hanging up. Paul continued driving, mulling over his friend's warning. He had a good eye for authenticity when it came to cars, but it never hurt to be cautious. As he approached his destination, the neighborhoods grew increasingly industrial. Auto body shops, small manufacturing plants, and warehouses lined the streets. When his GPS announced that he had arrived, Paul pulled over and checked the address again. He was looking for Rodriguez Auto Repair, but the building in front of him looked like a typical neighborhood garage, not the kind of place you'd expect to find a collector-grade Porsche. Parking his car, Paul stepped out into the heat. The garage doors were open, revealing several cars in various states of repair inside. A sign with faded lettering confirmed he was in the right place. Rodriguez Auto Repair. Honest work, fair prices. Paul walked toward the entrance, noting the absence of activity. It was approaching 5 in the afternoon, not exactly closing time for most auto shops. He called out a hello but received no response. That's when he noticed a Honda Civic parked to the side of the building, windows down. As he walked past, he glanced inside and saw a man slumped in the driver's seat, clearly asleep. The man's uniform shirt had Kyle embroidered on the chest pocket, and the exhaustion was evident on his face, even in sleep. Paul hesitated. He needed information about the Porsche he'd come to see, but something about the sleeping mechanic gave him pause. The man looked completely drained, the kind of tired that comes from pushing yourself beyond reasonable limits. Paul knew that, look, he'd seen it on film sets during grueling shooting schedules, when crew members would grab naps whenever and wherever they could. Instead of waking him, Paul decided to check inside the garage first. He walked in, calling out once more, "Hello? Anyone here?" A woman emerged from a small office, surprise registering on her face when she recognized him. "Oh my God," she said, then immediately composed herself. "I mean, hello, can I help you?" "I'm looking for someone who contacted me about a Porsche 911, Paul said, extending his hand. "I'm Paul." "I know who you are," she said, shaking his hand. "I'm Alejandra Santiago. I run this place, but I'm afraid there must be some mistake. We don't have any Porsches here, let alone a classic 911. Paul frowned. The address I was given was definitely for Rodriguez Auto Repair. Alejandra shook her head. "That's us, but we mostly handle everyday repairs for the neighborhood. Nothing exotic, definitely no collector cars." It dawned on Paul that he might have been lured here under false pretenses. It wouldn't be the first time someone had used his name or interest in cars to set up some kind of ambush for photos or autographs. "I saw a mechanic sleeping in his car. Outside," Paul said, changing the subject. "Looked like he could use the rest." Alejandra's expression softened. "That's Kyle. He's been working himself to the bone lately. We're short-staffed, and he refuses to turn anyone away. She glanced at her watch. He's supposed to be taking a quick break before our last appointment shows up, but honestly, I'd let him sleep through it if I could handle the job myself. Something in her tone caught Paul's attention. Tough times. Alejandra hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share with a stranger, celebrity or not. We're hanging in there, she finally said. It's not easy for independent shops these days. The big chains can undercut our prices, and the dealerships take all the customers who can afford to pay more. But we have loyal people who depend on us. Paul nodded, looking around the garage with new interest. Despite its worn appearance, the shop was meticulously organized. Tools hung in their proper places. The floor was swept clean despite the day's work. And even from a layman's perspective, the repairs in progress looked professional. Outside, a car pulled up, an older Camaro with a distinctive rumble that didn't sound quite right to Paul's trained ear. That must be Brett with the Camaro, Alejandra said, looking concerned. I should wake Kyle. What's wrong with the car? Paul asked. Timing belt, according to Kyle. Brett's been putting it off because of the cost, but Kyle warned him it could cause engine damage if he waits too long. Paul made a split-second decision. Let him sleep a bit longer. I know a thing or two about cars. Maybe I can help? Alejandra looked skeptical. No offense, but playing a car enthusiast in movies isn't quite the same as... Paul laughed. I was working on engines long before Hollywood came calling, and I've built up a pretty serious collection since then. I'm no professional mechanic, but I'm not just acting when it comes to my love for cars. Before she could respond, the Camaro's owner walked in. Brett Perry was a man in his early 30s, wearing the uniform of a delivery service. His eyes widened when he recognized Paul, but to his credit, he quickly recovered. I'm here for my car appointment, Brett said, looking between Paul and Alejandra with confusion. Is Kyle around? He's taking a break, Alejandra said smoothly. He's been working since dawn, but we'll take care of your car. We? Brett asked. Paul stepped forward, extending his hand. I'm Paul. I happened to stop by and offered to help out while Kyle gets some rest. I heard you're having timing belt issues? Brett shook Paul's hand, still looking stunned. Yeah, that's what Kyle said last time. Said it needed to be replaced before it snaps and causes real damage. He's right about that, Paul said. Mind if I take a listen? What followed was surreal for everyone involved. Paul Walker, Hollywood star known for racing exotic cars on screen, bent over the open hood of a well-worn Camaro in a small neighborhood garage, discussing timing belt replacement options with its working-class owner. But what impressed Alejandra wasn't that a famous actor knew his way around an engine. It was the way Paul spoke to Brett. There was no condescension, no showing off his knowledge. Instead, he listened to Brett's concerns about cost, explained the repair process in straightforward terms, and even suggested some alternative approaches that might save money without compromising safety. The belt definitely needs replacing, Paul confirmed after examining the engine. But the tensioner and water pump look okay, which is good news. Sometimes you have to replace those at the same time, which adds to the cost. Brett looked relieved. So what happens now? I mean, Kyle's out, and I don't want to assume you're actually going to... I can do it, came a voice from the doorway. Dial Murphy stood there, looking slightly embarrassed. Sorry about that, Brett. Didn't mean to clock out on you. Kyle, you should have taken a longer break, Alejandra said. You've been going non-stop all day. Kyle shrugged. Caught enough Z's to function. Let me just wash my face and I'll get started on the Camaro. Paul studied Kyle, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the slight sway in his stance that suggested he was still exhausted. Why don't we tag team it, Paul suggested. I've got nowhere to be and it'll go faster with 2 sets of hands. Kyle looked at Paul with surprise, clearly recognizing him but too professional or too tired to make a big deal about it. You serious? He asked. Absolutely, Paul replied. Been a while since I got my hands properly dirty on a repair job. Might be fun. And so began one of the most unusual evenings at Rodriguez Auto Repair. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the open garage doors, Paul Walker and Kyle Murphy worked side by side on Brett Perry's Camaro. Paul easily fell into the rhythm of the work, handing tools to Kyle before he asked for them, offering suggestions that revealed his genuine knowledge, and sharing stories about restoration projects he'd tackled himself. What none of them realized was that this chance encounter, a misdirected appointment, a sleeping mechanic, an actor with a passion for automobiles, was about to change everything for the struggling garage and the dedicated people who kept it running. By the time they closed the hood on Brett's repaired Camaro, something had shifted in the atmosphere of Rodriguez Auto Repair. A seed had been planted in Paul's mind, one that would grow into something none of them could have anticipated, something that would, indeed, leave the entire garage in tears. But that part of the story was still to come. For now, as Brett drove away with a properly functioning car and Kyle locked up the garage for the night, all that existed was the satisfaction of a job well done and the unexpected connection between people from very different worlds who shared a common passion. What Paul had seen that day, the dedication, the expertise, the community service that happened quietly in this unassuming garage, had affected him deeply. And Paul Walker wasn't a man who walked away when he saw an opportunity to make a difference. The morning after their unexpected collaboration, Kyle Murphy arrived at Rodriguez Auto Repair earlier than usual. The brief rest had done him good, but what truly energized him was the previous evening's experience. Working alongside Paul Walker, someone whose passion for cars matched his own, despite their vastly different lives, had rekindled something in Kyle that the daily grind had slowly dimmed. As he unlocked the garage, Kyle replayed the events. In his mind, the surreal image of a Hollywood star bent over the engine of Brett Perry's Camaro, discussing timing belt tension as casually as if they'd been colleagues for years. The easy way Paul had handed him tools before he'd even asked for them. The genuine questions about the garage's operations, their challenges, their customers. Kyle had expected Paul to leave after Brett's car was fixed, a random celebrity encounter. That would make for a good story, but nothing more. But Paul had lingered, helping Kyle clean up the workspace, asking more questions about the neighborhood and the people who depended on the garage. "You're here early," Alejandra said, startling Kyle from his thoughts as she walked in with a cardboard tray holding coffee cups. "Brought you some caffeine. Figured you might need it after yesterday." Kyle accepted the coffee gratefully. "Thanks. Just wanted to get a head start on Charlene Ortega's Subaru. That head gasket replacement is going to take most of the day." Alejandra nodded, setting her bag down on the small desk in the office. "So, yesterday was interesting." "Yeah," Kyle said with a half smile. "Definitely not how I expected the day to end." "Do you think he was serious?" Alejandra asked, her voice carefully neutral, about wanting to come back and check out the garage more thoroughly. Before leaving the previous night, Paul had expressed interest in returning to see the garage during regular hours to get a better sense of their operation. He'd mentioned vague ideas about possibly featuring the shop in some kind of project, but hadn't elaborated. Kyle shrugged. "Who knows? Celebrities say things all the time. I'm not counting on it." Alejandra looked like she wanted to say more, but was interrupted by the phone ringing. Kyle used the opportunity to start pulling tools for the day's work, trying not to dwell on the possibility of Paul Walker's return. False hope was a luxury he couldn't afford. By mid-morning, the garage had fallen into its usual rhythm. Brandy Morgan had returned to work. Her child recovered enough for school, which eased some of the pressure on Kyle. The familiar sounds of metal on metal, pneumatic tools, and the occasional curse when a particularly stubborn bolt refused to budge filled the space. Kyle was deep under Charlene's Subaru when he heard an unfamiliar engine approach. Something powerful but well-tuned, with a distinctive rumble that made him slide out from under the car to look. A sleek, silver Nissan GTR had pulled up outside the garage. Paul Walker stepped out wearing jeans, a simple t-shirt and sunglasses. He carried a cardboard box under one arm. "Morning," Paul called, walking into the garage as if his appearance there was the most natural thing in the world. "Hope I'm not interrupting." Kyle got to his feet, wiping his hands on a rag. "Not at all. Didn't really expect to see you again." Paul set the box down on a nearby workbench. "I said I'd come back, didn't I? Brought some donuts from this place in Santa Monica that makes them fresh." He glanced around the garage. "Where's Alejandra?" "On a parts run," Kyle said, still processing the fact that Paul Walker had returned to their small garage bearing breakfast. "Should be back soon." Paul nodded, opening the box to reveal an assortment of donuts. "Good, because I wanted to talk to both of you about something." Before Kyle could ask what Paul had in mind, the phone rang again. With an apologetic glance, Kyle went to answer it, leaving Paul to wander around the garage, studying the ongoing repair jobs with genuine interest. The call was from Diana Buck, an elderly woman whose ancient Toyota Corolla was their scheduled afternoon appointment. Her voice was tight with anxiety as she explained that her car wouldn't start and she had a doctor's appointment she couldn't miss. "Don't worry, Mrs. Buck," Kyle assured her. "I'll come to you. Text me your address and I'll be there as soon as I can." He hung up and turned to find Paul watching him. "Customer trouble?" Paul asked. Kyle nodded. "Elderly woman with a car that won't start. She's stranded at home and needs to get to a doctor's appointment." "Want some company?" Paul offered, surprising. Kyle again. "I've got time, and two heads are better than one for diagnosing issues on the spot." Kyle hesitated, uncertain about dragging a celebrity to a house call in one of the less affluent neighborhoods. "It's probably just a dead battery or a starter issue. Nothing exciting," Paul shrugged. "Sometimes the simple fixes are the most satisfying. Besides, I'm curious to see more of how you operate around here." 20 minutes later, Kyle found himself in the passenger seat of Paul Walker's GTR, directing him through the streets toward Diana Buck's address. The car moved with precision and power that made Kyle, a lifelong automobile enthusiast, appreciate the engineering behind it. "So, how long have you been at Rodriguez?" Paul asked as they drove. "Almost 15 years, Kyle replied. "Started right out of tech school." "That's a long time to stay at one garage. Must be something special about the place." Kyle looked out the window, considering his answer. "It's not the place so much as the people. Antonio, that was Alejandra's father, the original owner. He gave me a chance when nobody else would." He paused, debating whether to elaborate, then decided there was no harm in it. "I had some trouble as a teenager. Nothing violent, but enough to give me a record. Made it hard to get anyone to take a chance on me." Paul nodded, his eyes on the road. "Antonio sounds like a good man." "The best," Kyle agreed. "Taught me everything I know about cars, and a lot about people too. When he died, it hit everyone hard. Alejandra was working as an accountant downtown, but she quit to take over the garage. We couldn't bear to see her father's legacy disappear." "Noble," Paul commented, "but challenging, I'm guessing, if she wasn't already in the auto repair business." "She's smart, picked up the business side quickly, and she trusts me and Brandy to handle the mechanical work." Kyle directed Paul to turn left at the next intersection. "But yeah, it's been an uphill battle. The building needs work, equipment is getting outdated, and the big chains keep undercutting our prices. We survive on loyalty and word of mouth." They pulled up to a small, well-maintained house with a faded Toyota Corolla in the driveway. Diana Buck was waiting on the porch, a small woman in her 70s with silver hair and a concerned expression that lifted slightly when she recognized Kyle. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she called, coming down to meet them. She paused when she saw Paul, a flicker of recognition crossing her face, but her car troubles quickly reclaimed her attention. It just wouldn't start this morning. Made a clicking noise and then nothing. Let's take a look, Kyle said reassuringly. This is my friend Paul. He's helping out at the garage today. Paul smiled warmly at Diana, shaking her hand. Nice to meet you, ma'am. Let's see if we can get you to that appointment on time. What followed was a textbook example of roadside diagnostics. Kyle popped the hood while Paul chatted with Diana, putting her at ease with his down-to-earth manner. The problem was indeed the battery, which had corroded terminals and had finally given up after years of service. Good news, Kyle told Diana after testing the system with a multimeter he'd brought along. It's just the battery. Bad news is you definitely need a new one. Diana's face fell. How much will that cost? I'm on a fixed income and this month has been tight already with the medical bills. Kyle and Paul exchanged a glance. Tell you what, Kyle said. I've got a suitable battery back at the garage that we can install today. It's refurbished, but it's got plenty of life left and comes with a warranty. What will that cost? Diana asked hesitantly. Let's call it a maintenance special, Kyle said. $50 including installation. Paul, knowing that even a refurbished battery would cost the garage more than that, gave Kyle an approving nod. This was clearly not the first time Rodriguez Auto Repair had adjusted their prices to accommodate a customer in need. I'll go get the battery, Kyle said. Paul, can you give me a lift back to the garage? We'll return and install it right away, Mrs. Buck. Oh, I can't thank you enough, Diana said, relief evident in her voice. My doctor doesn't like rescheduling, and the bus route would take nearly 2 hours each way. As they drove back to the garage, Paul was quiet, thoughtful. Kyle wondered if the Hollywood star was regretting his offer to help with such mundane tasks. You do that a lot? Paul finally asked. The maintenance special pricing. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. When we need to. Mrs. Buck has been coming to the garage for 20 years. Her husband used to bring the car in before he passed. She bakes us cookies every Christmas. He shrugged. It's not always good business, but it's the right thing to do. Paul nodded slowly. You know, that's what's been bugging me since yesterday. I couldn't put my finger on why your garage stuck in my mind. And? Kyle prompted when Paul didn't continue. It's that you're doing something real, Paul said simply. In my world, everything is smoke and mirrors. We make movies about car culture, about family, about loyalty, but it's all scripts and camera angles. What you're doing here, it actually matters to people's daily lives. They arrived back at the garage to find Alejandra had returned. Her eyes widened at the sight of Paul's GTR. You actually came back, she said as they exited the car. Told you I would, Paul replied with an easy smile. Currently on a mission to help Kyle rescue a stranded customer, but when we get back, I'd like to talk to you both about something. Kyle quickly located the refurbished battery he'd mentioned, and they returned to Diana's house. The installation took only 15 minutes, and Diana's car started up immediately, its engine purring more smoothly than it had in months. Kyle took the opportunity to check your oil and top off your fluids, Paul told Diana as Kyle closed the hood. Everything else looks good. Diana insisted on paying immediately, pressing the $50 into Kyle's reluctant hand. I know what a battery costs, she said firmly. You're doing me a favor, and I won't forget it, but I pay my way. As they watched her drive off to her appointment, Paul turned to Kyle. Ready to head back? I've got an idea I want to run by you and Alejandra. The ride back to the garage was filled with casual conversation about cars, models they'd worked on, restoration projects, dream vehicles. Despite the vast differences in their circumstances, Paul and Kyle shared a common language when it came to automobiles, a mutual respect for the engineering and artistry that went into creating them. Back at Rodriguez Auto Repair, they found Alejandra in the office, poring over invoices with a worried expression. She quickly composed her features when they walked in, but not before Paul noticed the concern in her eyes. Everything okay? He asked. Just the usual juggling act, she said dismissively. What did you want to talk about? Paul gestured for them both to sit. So, I came here yesterday because of a mix-up. Someone gave me this address, claiming there was a rare Porsche here I might be interested in. Still no idea who that could have been, Alejandra said. We definitely don't deal with high-end vehicles like that. I think it was just someone's idea of a prank, Paul said. But I'm actually glad it happened, because otherwise I wouldn't have found this place. He leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. I have a proposition for you. Kyle and Alejandra exchanged glances. What kind of proposition? Kyle asked cautiously. I've been looking for a new project, Paul explained. Something meaningful, something real. I've got a foundation that supports various causes, but I've been wanting to do something more hands-on, more direct. He paused, looking around the small office with its faded calendars and filing cabinets. What would you say to the idea of a partnership, investment, upgrades, expansion, taking what you've built here and helping it grow while preserving what makes it special? Alejandra stared at him. You want to invest in our garage. Why? Paul leaned back, considering his words carefully. Because what you're doing here matters. You're keeping people mobile, keeping them employed, keeping them connected. In a city like LA, a reliable car isn't a luxury. It's essential for survival. And you're providing that service with integrity, even when it costs you. He looked at Kyle. That $50 battery for Mrs. Buck, that's not sustainable business, but it's admirable humanity. I'd like to create a situation where you can do both. Run a profitable operation while still serving the community that depends on you. Kyle looked skeptical. No offense, but celebrity investments don't have the best track record. They tend to be passing interests that fade when something more exciting comes along. Paul nodded, acknowledging the concern. Fair point. That's why I'm not suggesting I take over or even have a controlling interest. I'm thinking more along the lines of a silent partner who provides capital and maybe some connections, while you continue to run the operation as you see fit. Alejandra's practical nature asserted itself. What would you want in return? A share of the profits? Because honestly, there aren't many to share right now. I'm thinking longer term, Paul replied. I believe with the right upgrades and maybe some strategic expansion, this place could become a model for other independent garages. And yes, eventually I'd expect a return on investment, but that's not the primary goal. He hesitated, then decided to be completely honest. Look, I've been fortunate in my career. I've made more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. But money sitting in accounts doesn't do much good in the world. I'd rather put it to work in places like this, where it can make a tangible difference. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a celebrity whim or a tax write-off. A scheme. Paul Walker genuinely wanted to help preserve and grow what Rodriguez Auto Repair represented. Kyle and Alejandra were silent, processing the unexpected offer. It was almost too good to believe, a solution to their financial struggles appearing. Out of nowhere, delivered by a Hollywood star who'd wandered into their garage by accident. I know it's a lot to take in, Paul said, standing up. You don't need to decide right now. Think about it, talk it over. I'll leave you my personal number, not my agent's or manager's. Call me when you've had time to consider it. He wrote his number on a slip of paper and placed it on the desk. In the meantime, I'd like to come by again tomorrow if that's okay. Maybe shadow you for a day, get a better feel for the operation. No pressure, just observation. As Paul left, promising to return the next morning, Kyle and Alejandra sat in stunned silence. The paper with Paul Walker's personal phone number lay between them like a lottery ticket waiting to be claimed. Do you think he's serious? Alejandra finally asked, echoing her question from earlier that morning. Kyle stared at the doorway where Paul had exited. Yeah, he said slowly. I think he is. The question is, what do we do about it? Neither of them could have anticipated what would unfold over the next few days as Paul Walker's interest in their small garage transformed into something far more profound than a business investment. Something that would indeed leave everyone at Rodriguez Auto Repair in tears, but not the kind they had grown accustomed to in their struggle to survive. The following day dawned with a sense of anticipation at Rodriguez Auto Repair. Kyle arrived, early as usual, but today he took extra time organizing the workspace, making mental notes of the shop's most glaring deficiencies. The hydraulic lift that sometimes stuck halfway up, the outdated diagnostic equipment, the roof that leaked during heavy rains. If Paul Walker was serious about investing in the garage, these would be the first issues to address. Alejandra arrived shortly after, carrying a folder of financial documents. She and Kyle had talked late into the previous night, weighing the potential benefits and pitfalls of accepting outside investment, especially from someone in the entertainment industry. "Did you sleep at all?" Kyle asked, noting the dark circles under her eyes. "A few hours," she admitted. "I was up looking through the books, trying to get a clear picture of where we stand. If Paul is serious about this, we need to be transparent about our financial situation." Kyle nodded. "And what's the verdict?" Alejandra sighed. "We're staying afloat, but barely. The building lease comes up for renewal in 4 months. And the landlord has already hinted at a significant increase. Equipment maintenance keeps draining our reserves, and we're barely paying ourselves living wages." She looked around the garage, her expression a mixture of determination and worry. "My father built this place from nothing. I can't be the one who lets it die." "So you're considering Paul's offer?" Kyle asked carefully. "I'm considering all options," Alejandra replied. "Paul's arrival feels almost too convenient, like some kind of movie plot twist, but we can't afford to dismiss it out of hand." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Brandy Morgan, who looked between them with curiosity. "Why do you both look so serious? Did something happen after I left yesterday?" Before either could respond, the rumble of a powerful engine announced Paul's arrival. This time, he was driving a classic 1967 Ford Mustang Fastback, restored to pristine condition. The glossy black paint reflected the morning sun as he parked beside the garage. "Morning," Paul called, climbing out of the car. He was dressed similarly to the day before, casual clothes appropriate for a day in an auto shop. "Hope I'm not too early?" "Not at all," Alejandra said, stepping forward to shake his hand. "We were just discussing some business matters." Paul nodded, his expression turning serious. "Including my proposition, I'm guessing." When Alejandra nodded, he continued, "I meant what I said. Take all the time you need to think it through. Today, I'm just here to observe and learn." Kyle gestured toward the Mustang. "Beautiful car. 67. Paul smiled, his passion for automobiles evident. "Good eye, completely restored 2 years ago. Original 390 V8 engine, 4-speed manual. Not the most practical daily driver in LA traffic, but some days you need to hear that engine roar." The arrival of their first customers prevented further car talk. The morning unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Oil changes, brake pad replacements, diagnostic checks on vehicles with mysterious engine lights illuminated. Paul observed it, all occasionally asking questions, but mostly staying out of the way, watching how the small team worked together. Around noon, a tow truck pulled up with a severely damaged Honda Accord. The driver, Dominique Fox, a young woman in her early 20s, stood beside the truck looking devastated. "Someone sideswiped me on the freeway last night," she explained, as Kyle examined the damage. "They didn't even stop. My insurance has a $1,000 deductible that I can't afford right now, but I need my car for work. I drive for 3 different delivery services just to make rent." Kyle walked around the vehicle, assessing the crumpled driver's side and damaged wheel assembly. The frame might be bent, he said gently. Even if we just focus on making it drivable, you're looking at parts and labor that will run well over your deductible. Dominique's face fell. I don't have that kind of money. I barely make ends meet as it is. Her voice cracked slightly. Without my car, I can't work. Without work, I can't pay rent. I don't know what to do. Paul, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Excuse me, he said to Kyle. Mind if I take a look? Kyle stepped aside, watching as Paul examined the damage with an expert eye, checking angles and alignment, testing how the remaining wheels responded. The unibody is compromised, Paul confirmed, but it could be pulled back into alignment enough to be safely drivable. He turned to Kyle. You have frame straightening equipment here? Kyle shook his head. We usually refer those jobs out. Never had the capital to invest in a frame machine. Paul nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Dominique. Would you excuse us for a moment? He led Kyle and Alejandra a few steps away, speaking quietly. I know a guy who owes me a favor, Todd Garcia at Precision Collision. He has state-of-the-art frame straightening equipment. If you can handle the mechanical repairs here, I bet he'd do the framework as a professional courtesy. Alejandra looked skeptical. Why would he do that for a garage he doesn't know? He'd be doing it for me, Paul clarified. We met on a film years ago when he was consulting on some stunt driving sequences. He's good people. Kyle glanced back at Dominique, who was staring at her damaged car with an expression of hopelessness. Even with the framework covered, parts and labor would still be substantial. Paul considered this. What if we use quality aftermarket parts instead of OEM? And he hesitated, then committed to his idea. What if I cover the parts cost as an advance on our potential partnership? Consider it a good faith investment. Kyle and Alejandra exchanged looks of surprise. You'd do that for a complete stranger? Alejandra asked. Paul's expression turned serious. When I was younger, before my career took off, my car broke down right before a crucial audition. I couldn't afford the repair, and it could have derailed everything. But a mechanic took pity on me, fixed it for parts cost only, and let me pay him back in installments, he shrugged. Sometimes people just need a break. After a brief discussion, they approached Dominique with a proposal. They would repair her car for a significantly reduced rate with an affordable payment plan for the remainder. The relief on her face was immediate and profound. I don't know how to thank you, she said, tears welling in her eyes. Just pay it forward someday when you can, Kyle told her, a phrase Antonio had often used when helping customers in tight spots. As Dominique left, promising to return when her car was ready, Paul made a call to his contact at Precision Collision. The conversation was brief but productive, ending with an agreement to transport the Honda to their facility for frame straightening first thing the next morning. Todd says he can have it back to you by tomorrow afternoon, Paul reported. No, don't charge, but he did mention he'd appreciate tickets next time I have a premiere. The rest of the day continued in similar fashion, with Paul observing the operation, but occasionally offering suggestions or contacts that could help solve particular problems. He showed special interest in the community aspect of the garage, the relationships Kyle and Alejandra had built with their customers, the trust that had been established over years of fair dealing. During a brief lull in the afternoon, Paul wandered into the small office where Alejandra was working on invoices. He noticed a framed photograph on the wall, a younger Antonio Hill standing proudly in front of the newly opened Rodriguez Auto Repair, his arm around a teenage Alejandra. Your father? Paul asked, gesturing to the photo. Alejandra nodded, a smile warming her features. That was opening day almost 30 years ago. He'd worked as a mechanic for 15 years before saving enough to open his own place. Why Rodriguez Auto Repair? If his name was Hill, my mother was Elena Rodriguez, Alejandra explained. She died when I was young. The garage was his way of honoring her memory. She touched the frame gently. "He always said she was the engine that kept our family running." Paul was quiet for a moment, absorbing this piece of the garage's history. "He sounds like a remarkable man." "He was," Alejandra agreed. "Not just to me, but to so many people in this community. He gave Kyle his start when no one else would take a chance on him. He let customers pay in installments when times were tough. He taught neighborhood kids basic car maintenance for free on Saturday mornings." Her voice grew softer. "After he died, I found a drawer full of IOUs that he'd never collected on. People he'd helped who couldn't pay at the time. And you took over to preserve that legacy," Paul said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Even though it wasn't your field." Alejandra nodded. "I was doing well in corporate accounting. Good salary, benefits, clear path to advancement. But this place was his heart and soul. I couldn't bear to see it sold off or closed down." She gestured around the small office. "I've learned a lot about cars in the last 3 years, but the business side has been challenging. Costs keep rising, and we can't raise our rates too much because our customers simply can't afford it." Paul leaned against the doorframe, thoughtful. "What if there was a way to honor your father's approach to business while making the garage more financially sustainable?" Alejandra looked up, intrigued. "Such as a sliding scale payment system, perhaps. Those who can afford to pay full price do so, which subsidizes reduced rates for those in need. Or maybe a membership model for regular maintenance, spreading costs out over time to make them more manageable." Paul straightened up. "Just ideas. I'm sure you've considered similar approaches." "We have," Alejandra admitted. "But implementing new business models requires capital we don't have. Marketing, software systems, training." She closed the invoice book she'd been working on. "That's why your offer is so unexpected and timely." Paul nodded, understanding the weight of the decision before her. "I meant what I said yesterday. Think it through. Talk it over with Kyle and anyone else you trust. I'm not in a rush." As the day wound down and the last customer departed, Paul helped Kyle and Brandy clean up the workspace, demonstrating that his earlier participation hadn't been for show. He seemed genuinely comfortable in the garage environment, respectful of their expertise while offering his own knowledge where relevant. When everything was in order, Paul leaned against the Mustang's fender. "I should get going. You've all been more than generous with your time today. Will we see you tomorrow?" Kyle asked, surprising himself with how much he hoped the answer would be yes. Paul smiled. "Actually, I was thinking we might want to continue this conversation. In a different setting. There's a diner about a mile from here, Evelyn's Place. Good food, casual atmosphere. Would you both be available for dinner, say, around 7? My treat, of course." Kyle and Alejandra exchanged glances, then nodded in agreement. "Great," Paul said, climbing into the Mustang. "And feel free to bring Brandy, too, if she's interested. I'd like everyone involved in the garage to be part of this discussion." As the sound of the Mustang's engine faded into the distance, Kyle turned to Alejandra. "So what's your gut telling you now?" Alejandra watched the space where Paul's car had been. "That this might be the miracle we've been needing. But miracles make me nervous." "Because they're too good to be true?" Kyle asked. "Because they come with responsibilities," Alejandra replied. "My father used to say that opportunities aren't just gifts, they're obligations to do better, be better." Kyle nodded, understanding. If they accepted Paul's offer, it wouldn't just be about saving the garage. It would be about building something worthy of the investment, something that honored Antonio's legacy while evolving to meet new challenges. That evening at Evelyn's Place, a small family-owned diner with vinyl booths and a menu that hadn't changed in decades, the future of Rodriguez Auto Repair began to take shape. Paul had arrived early, securing a corner booth away from other diners. Kyle, Alejandra, and Brandy joined him, all three slightly self-conscious about their post-work appearance, but relaxing, when they saw Paul was still in his casual clothes from earlier. After ordering, Paul pulled out a slim laptop. "I hope you don't mind, but I've put together some thoughts based on what I observed over the past 2 days. What followed was far more comprehensive than any of them had expected." Paul had created a detailed proposal outlining potential improvements to the garage, everything from equipment upgrades to expansion possibilities, marketing strategies to community outreach programs. It even included financial projections showing how these changes could increase revenue while maintaining the garage's commitment to accessible pricing. "This is incredibly thorough," Alejandra said, paging through the printed copy Paul had provided. "You put this together just from 2 days of observation?" Paul looked slightly embarrassed. "I may have stayed up late last night. When I get interested in something, I tend to dive in deep." He took a sip of his water. "It's just a starting point for discussion. You know your business and community far better than I do." Kyle studied a section about apprenticeship programs for at-risk youth. "This is something Antonio always wanted to formalize," he said quietly. "He talked about it for years, creating pathways for kids who might otherwise fall through the cracks. But we never had the resources. That's the kind of initiative I'd be particularly interested in supporting," Paul said. "Not just upgrading equipment or expanding the physical space, but building programs that extend Thegarage's impact." As their food arrived, the conversation continued, growing more animated as Kyle, Alejandra, and Brandy began to engage with the possibilities Paul had outlined. Ideas were suggested, modified, sometimes discarded, but always discussed with mutual respect. It wasn't a celebrity dictating terms or a business tycoon orchestrating a takeover. It was a genuine collaboration among people who shared a vision, despite coming from vastly different worlds. By the time dessert arrived, the initial skepticism had largely dissolved. The question was no longer if they would accept Paul's investment, but how they would structure the partnership to ensure the garage's core values remained intact while embracing necessary changes. "I think we should sleep on this," Alejandra finally said, closing the proposal folder. "But speaking just for myself, I'm inclined to say yes." Kyle nodded in agreement. "Same here." Brandy, who had been quieter throughout the dinner but no less engaged, added her endorsement. "Antonio would have loved this. Not just the investment, but the vision behind it." Paul looked genuinely pleased, but also solemn, aware of the responsibility he was taking on. "Take the time you need. This isn't just a business decision. It's personal for all of you. I respect that." As they prepared to leave the diner, Paul hesitated, then addressed the group. "There's one more thing I'd like to propose, but it's a bit different from what we've discussed so far. More of a short-term project, while we work out the details of the larger partnership." "What kind of project?" Kyle asked. Paul's expression was difficult to read, part excitement, part uncertainty. "It's better if I show you. Are you all free this Saturday morning, around 8? Though curious about what Paul had in mind, they all agreed to the meeting. None of them could have anticipated what would be waiting for them that Saturday, something that would fundamentally change their understanding of Paul's interest in Rodriguez Auto Repair and lead to the emotional moment that would leave the entire garage in tears. Saturday morning arrived with the clarity that only comes after a storm. The previous night, Los Angeles had experienced a rare thunderstorm that washed the city clean, leaving behind air that was unusually crisp and skies of perfect blue. Kyle arrived at Rodriguez Auto Repair 15 minutes early, curious about what Paul had planned. The garage was closed to customers on Saturdays, a policy Alejandra had instituted to give their small team a much-needed break, making it the perfect time for whatever. Paul wanted to show them Alejandra pulled up moments later, followed closely by Brandy. They exchanged greetings tinged with anticipation. Over the past few days, the possibility of Paul's investment had sparked a cautious hope among them. After years of just scraping by, the idea that they might not only survive but thrive was still difficult to fully embrace. "Any idea what he's planning?" Brandy asked, leaning against her car. Kyle shook his head. "Not a clue, but he seemed, I don't know, almost nervous about it." "Nervous isn't a word I'd associate with Paul Walker," Alejandra remarked. "The man faces down explosions and car crashes in his movies without blinking. Acting is one thing," Kyle said. "Real life is something else entirely. They didn't have to wonder long." At exactly 8 o'clock, they heard the distinctive sound of multiple high-performance engines approaching. Paul's now familiar GTR led a procession of vehicles that made all three mechanics straighten up in surprise. Behind Paul came a classic Ford Bronco, followed by a custom Nissan Skyline, a meticulously restored Chevrolet Chevelle SS, and a sleek Porsche 911 GT3. Each vehicle was immaculate, gleaming in the morning sun. As the impressive lineup parked, in front of the garage, Paul stepped out of his GTR, followed by 4 other men who exited the remaining vehicles. Kyle immediately recognized Caleb Ritter, the friend Paul had spoken to on the phone that first day, emerging from the Porsche. The others were unfamiliar, but carried themselves with the confident ease of people comfortable around exceptional automobiles. "Morning," Paul called, approaching with a smile that didn't quite mask his evident nervousness. "Hope I'm not keeping you waiting." "Not at all," Alejandra replied, her eyes moving between Paul and the impressive collection of vehicles, "though I'm definitely curious about what's happening." Paul gestured toward his companions. "Let me introduce everyone. This is Caleb Ritter, who you've heard me mention." Caleb stepped forward to shake hands with Kyle, Alejandra, and Brandy. "And these are Ryan Jenkins, Jordan Rodriguez, and Stephen Vasquez, all members of my car club." After introductions were complete, Paul took a deep breath. "So, about this project I mentioned, it's actually more of a proposition." He glanced at his friends, who nodded encouragingly. "Our car club isn't just about collecting and racing vehicles. We also do restoration work, charity events, and community outreach." Paul led them toward the lineup of impressive automobiles. "Each of these cars has a story. The Bronco was my first major restoration project. The Skyline was imported from Japan and customized over 2 years. The Chevelle belonged to Stephen's father, who taught him everything he knows about cars." Kyle nodded appreciatively, his expert eye noting the care and craftsmanship evident in each vehicle. "They're beautiful machines." "They are," Paul agreed, "but they're also constantly in need of maintenance and occasional repairs. Currently, we spread that work among several shops around LA, depending on specialties and availability." He paused, looking directly at the 3 mechanics. "We'd like to consolidate that work with one trusted garage, a garage run by people who understand not just the mechanics, but the passion behind these cars." Alejandra's eyes widened as she grasped what Paul was suggesting. "You want us to service your car club's vehicles?" "Not just service them," Paul clarified. "We want Rodriguez Auto Repair to become our official garage, exclusive maintenance, restoration work, customization, emergency repairs, everything. And we're willing to pay premium rates for quality work from mechanics we trust." The implication was clear. This wouldn't just be a handful of oil changes and tune-ups. The car club's collection represented a substantial ongoing source of high-end work, the kind that paid well and showcased their skills. "That's extremely generous," Kyle said slowly, trying to process the offer. "But what about your existing clients? Your regular customers?" "That's the beauty of it," Paul explained. "This would be in addition to your current business, not a replacement. We don't need work done every day, But when we do, we'd pay rates that would help subsidize your more affordable services for the community." He gestured around the neighborhood. "You could continue being Rodriguez Auto Repair for the people who depend on you, while also becoming the go-to specialists for our group." Brandy looked thoughtful. "It's almost like the sliding scale payment model you mentioned the other day." "Exactly." Paul nodded. "Those who can afford to pay more do so, which helps keep services accessible for those who can't." Alejandra, ever practical, raised the obvious concern. "We're flattered by the offer, but we're not currently equipped to handle high-performance vehicles like these on a regular basis. The specialized tools alone would require significant investment." "That's where our partnership comes in," Paul said. "The investment we discussed would include upgrading your equipment and facilities to handle both your regular work and our more specialized needs." He paused, then added with a grin, "Plus, you'd get to work on some pretty amazing machines." The three mechanics exchanged glances, the excitement building between them. This wasn't just financial support, it was an opportunity to expand their skills, to work on dream vehicles while maintaining their commitment to the community. "There's more," Paul said, his expression turning more serious. "Step inside for a minute." Curious, they followed Paul into the garage. Inside, to their surprise, stood a large object covered by a tarp. Whatever was beneath it was approximately the size of a large workbench. "What's this?" Kyle asked. Paul took a deep breath. "Before I explain, I need to share something I discovered during my research into Rodriguez Auto Repair." He turned to Alejandra. "When I was putting together the proposal for our partnership, I did some digging into the history of this place. I wanted to understand what made it special, what made it worth preserving." Alejandra nodded, unsure where this was heading. "I found articles about your father," Paul continued, "about the work he did here, the people he helped, the reputation he built, and I found something else, something I don't think you know about." He pulled out his phone and brought up a saved image. "This is an article from a local paper 27 years ago. It features your father standing next to a custom workbench he built himself. He's quoted saying it was his pride and joy, designed specifically for the kind of detailed engine work he specialized in." Alejandra leaned closer to see the image, recognition dawning in her eyes. "I remember that workbench. It was incredible. Had all these built-in features, storage solutions. He designed himself. It was stolen during a break-in about a year before he died. He was heartbroken." Paul nodded, then reached for the edge of the tarp. "I know." In one smooth motion, he pulled the covering away, revealing what lay beneath. It was a workbench. But not just any workbench. It was an exact replica of the one in the photograph, with the same custom features, the same careful craftsmanship, even the same rich wood tones. Every detail had been meticulously recreated, from the specialized tool holders to the integrated lighting system. Alejandra gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. How did you—" "I couldn't find the original," Paul explained. "But the article had enough details, and the photo was clear enough that a master woodworker friend of mine could recreate it. We worked from the image and descriptions and added some modern touches I thought your father would have appreciated. Built-in power outlets, LED lighting, adjustable height settings." Alejandra approached the workbench slowly, running her fingers over the smooth surface, tracing the edges of the tool organizers that matched exactly what her father had designed all those years ago. Tears welled in her eyes. "He spent months building the original," she said softly. "Worked on it evenings and weekends. Said a mechanic's workbench was like a surgeon's operating table. It had to be perfect." Kyle and Brandy stood in respectful silence, understanding the significance of the moment. This wasn't just a piece of furniture, it was a tangible connection to the man who had built Rodriguez Auto Repair from nothing, whose legacy they worked every day to uphold. "There's an inscription," Paul said gently, pointing to a small brass plate mounted on the front of the bench. "I hope you don't mind." Alejandra leaned down to read the engraved words. "In memory of Antonio Hill, who built more than cars, he built community. Rodriguez Auto Repair, continuing the legacy." The tears that had been threatening now spilled freely down Alejandra's cheeks. She tried to speak, but emotion overwhelmed her. Instead, she did something that surprised everyone. She stepped forward and embraced Paul, holding tight as the full weight of the gesture hit her. "Thank you," she finally managed. "He would have loved this. He would have—" She couldn't finish, overcome again by emotion. Paul, clearly moved himself, simply nodded. "It's an honor to help preserve his legacy." Kyle stepped forward, examining the workbench with a mechanic's appreciation. "This is incredible craftsmanship. The original was before my time, but I've heard Antonio talk about it." He looked up at Paul. "This isn't just a gift. It's understanding what matters to us." "That's exactly what I was hoping for," Paul said, "because this workbench represents what I see in Rodriguez Auto Repair: craftsmanship, dedication, a commitment to doing things the right way, even when it's not the easiest or most profitable approach." He gestured for Caleb and the others to join them inside the garage. Which brings me to the final part of my proposition. Our car club doesn't just want Rodriguez Auto Repair to service our vehicles. We want to help transform it into a center for automotive excellence that remains rooted in community service. Over the next hour, Paul and his friends outlined a vision far more comprehensive than anything the Rodriguez team had imagined. Yes, there would be equipment upgrades and facility improvements, but there would also be apprenticeship programs for neighborhood youth, weekend workshops on basic car maintenance for community members, and a scholarship fund for promising students interested in automotive careers. Antonio used to say that knowing how to maintain your vehicle wasn't just about saving money, it was about independence, self-reliance, and safety, Paul said. We want to honor that philosophy by making sure those skills continue to be passed down. As they talked, Kyle noticed that Brandy had grown quiet, a thoughtful expression on her face. When there was a break in the conversation, she spoke up. "I keep thinking about something," she said. "That first day when Paul showed up looking for a Porsche that wasn't here, it seemed like a random mistake. But now..." She looked around at the assembled group. "It feels like more than coincidence." Paul exchanged glances with Caleb, an unspoken communication passing between them. "It wasn't entirely coincidence," he admitted, "or rather, it wasn't a mistake." The Rodriguez team looked at him in confusion. "The truth is," Paul explained, "we'd been looking for a community garage to partner with for months. Somewhere authentic, with real connections to the neighborhood and a reputation for integrity. We researched dozens of independent shops across LA." Caleb picked up the narrative. "Rodriguez Auto Repair kept coming up in our conversations with people. The single mother whose car you fixed at cost so she could get to her new job. The elderly couple you help with free diagnostics. The delivery driver whose van you keep running well past its expected lifespan. But we needed to see it firsthand." Paul continued. "We needed to understand if what we'd heard was real or exaggerated. So we created a reason for me to visit, a rare Porsche that didn't exist." Kyle shook his head in disbelief. "So that first day, when I was asleep in my car, was exactly what we needed to see," Paul confirmed. "Not just a mechanic who knew his craft, but someone who worked himself to exhaustion because he cared about the people who depended on him. Someone who embodied the values Antonio built into this place." Alejandra looked stunned. "You engineered that whole situation just to observe us?" "We created an opportunity to see Rodriguez Auto Repair as it really is, not as you might present it to a potential investor, Paul acknowledged. I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed to know if this place was as special as people said. And it is. It's even more so. There was a moment of silence as the Rodriguez team processed this revelation. Then, surprisingly, Kyle began to laugh. All this time, I've been thinking how lucky we were that you happened to wander into our garage by mistake, he said. Turns out you chose us. We did, Paul confirmed, and we hope you'll choose us too, as partners, as clients, as fellow believers in what Antonio started here. Alejandra, who had been quietly absorbing everything, finally spoke. My father used to say that cars brought people together. Rich or poor, young or old, everyone needs transportation, everyone appreciates craftsmanship, everyone values reliability. She looked around at the assembled group. I think he would approve of this partnership, not just because of the financial investment, but because it expands our community while honoring our roots. She extended her hand to Paul. Rodriguez Auto Repair accepts your proposition, all parts of it. As they shook hands, sealing the agreement, there wasn't a dry eye in the garage. Kyle, who rarely showed emotion, wiped away tears unashamedly. Brandy sniffled beside him. Even Paul's car club friends looked moved by the moment. They were tears of many things: relief after years of financial struggle, gratitude for being seen and valued, hope for a future that would build on Antonio's legacy rather than merely preserve it. But most of all, they were tears of recognition, of finding kindred spirits across boundaries of wealth and status, united by a shared appreciation for craftsmanship, integrity, and community. In the days and weeks that followed, Rodriguez Auto Repair began its transformation. New equipment arrived, the leaking roof was repaired, the hydraulic lift that had caused so many headaches was replaced with a state-of-the-art system. Antonio's recreated workbench became the centerpiece of the garage, a symbol of the past informing the future. Paul was true to his word about being a silent partner. He provided capital and connections, but left the day-to-day operations to the experts. The car club's vehicles became regular fixtures in the garage, alongside the neighborhood cars that had always been Rodriguez Auto Repair's bread and butter. The apprenticeship program launched with 4 neighborhood teenagers, including Dominique Fox's younger brother, learning basic automotive skills after school. Weekend maintenance workshops filled up immediately, with community members eager to learn how to better care for their vehicles. And Kyle, who had once been so exhausted he fell asleep in his car between appointments, finally hired 2 additional mechanics, both graduates of the technical school where Antonio had once taught night classes. The garage was busier than ever, but now they had the resources and staff to handle the workload without burning out. On a warm afternoon, 6 months after their partnership began, Paul stopped by the garage unannounced. He found Kyle beneath a classic Mustang similar to the one Paul had driven on his second visit, carefully rebuilding the transmission. On Antonio's workbench nearby, one of the apprentices was learning to clean and rebuild a carburetor under Brandy's watchful guidance. The garage hummed with productive energy, tools whirring, conversations flowing, music playing softly in the background. It was still Rodriguez Auto Repair, still the community institution Antonio had built, but strengthened and expanded rather than merely preserved. Paul leaned against a workbench, taking in the scene with satisfaction. Catching his eye, Kyle slid out from under the car and approached, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Just stopping by to check on things? Kyle asked. Paul nodded. Everything looks good from where I'm standing. Better than good, Kyle agreed. You know, when I first saw you standing over me that day while I was sleeping in my car, I never would have imagined we'd end up here. Paul smiled. Sometimes the most meaningful journeys start with an unexpected detour. Kyle glanced around the thriving garage, at Alejandra explaining an invoice to a grateful customer, at Brandy guiding the next generation of mechanics, at the mix of everyday cars and high-performance vehicles, all receiving the same careful attention. Antonio used to say something similar, Kyle recalled. He'd tell me, "The road takes you where you need to go, not always where you think you're headed." "Wise man," Paul said, his gaze falling on the workbench that had been recreated in Antonio's memory. "I think he'd be proud of where this particular road has led." Kyle nodded, emotion briefly tightening his throat. "Yeah," he managed finally, "I think he would." And in that moment, surrounded by the legacy of one man's vision and the promise of its continued evolution, the tears that had marked the beginning of their partnership were replaced by something more enduring, the quiet satisfaction of work done well, of community strengthened, of values upheld across generations. Rodriguez Auto Repair had been saved, but more importantly, it had been renewed, ready to serve its community for decades to come, keeping people moving forward on whatever roads they traveled.